Welcome, guys, to another episode of Raising Starseeds. Hi, Heidi. How are you doing?
Hi, doing great.
Awesome. We have a very special guest with us today, Jenni Houston. She is an intuitive trauma and anxiety coach. So, we're going to kind of hit the elephant in the room head on, and we're going to talk about trauma, and anxiety. It would be kind of easy to go and just spiritually gaslight everything that's going on in the world right now, but that really doesn't help any of us. So, we're gonna talk about how this past 18 months, I've been referring it to as the blip that we've been experiencing, but what that is actually doing to our physical bodies. And we're going to start out talking about the parents, the adults first, and then we're going to move on to the kids. But Jenni, please introduce yourself a little bit more. I know you have a lot of more credentials than what I just informed everyone on.
Well, thank you for having me, both of you. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I have an interesting journey to get to where I am today. I started off as a personal trainer, and I was a personal trainer for 30 plus years, which led me into nutrition, and then, went into some functional medicine, because, I was seeing that everyone was having, it wasn't just the food that was, and the exercise that people were struggling with. And then kind of a mixture of my own healing journey, and my own trauma work led me into the, trauma part of it. I have had anxiety ever since my dad passed away when I was 21. And it has been something that I have worked through and has waxed and waned over the years. But everything kind of came to a culmination, I guess, about 5 years ago. And I was like, can I be like a personal trainer for trauma? And I remember Googling it and finding some specific mentors that I was able to kind of tie everything in together. So I'm kind of the perfect mixture of science and woo, if you will. My sessions sometimes will, start with, neuroscience and nervous system education, and will be, we'll filter in some tarot readings. And so it kind of anything goes. But really, for me, the basis of disease and illness and where people are suffering, the root cause really is unprocessed trauma. So that's what I was seeing with my functional medicine clients, because I was working with a lot of women with autoimmune issues and chronic health issues, gut issues. And, we'd move the needle and then it would stop. And kind of the commonality with all of these people was, we would start unpacking and looking at their trauma, and that was where kind of the people were getting stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. So. And I do want to bring up to everyone who's listening, this is not to, pinpoint just certain people. We all have trauma, and we all have anxiety. I met Jenni because I went and had a session with her, and, and she helped to uncover some trauma that I had not really realized that was dealing with, and, was affecting the vagal nerve. But, especially in the past, 2 years, we have brought up a lot of things coming up to the surface, not only of us watching, the matrix for what it is, and a lot of our systems collapsing, but we've also, on a spiritual level, Gaia is shifting, and she has also been fluffing up a lot of her own traumas that we put inside of her. So anyone who is strongly empathic, you're feeling all of her traumas come up as well.
Yes. And, an important thing, and I want to say this, whenever trauma itself is a very triggering word, right? I joke with people that people I think are the most defensive over what they eat and their trauma, right? Because to admit it is this thing that either they've been protecting their family, or they've been protecting their shame, or they've been protecting their secrets, or whatever it is. And so, oftentimes one of my, and Abby, this, one of my intuitive gifts is that I can read people's trauma. So anyone who I come in contact with, I can kind of assess, not the particular event per se, but I can just read that aspect of them. So it can make for some heavy days, especially lately. But trauma, my definition of trauma is anything that happens too fast, too soon, or is too much for the nervous system to handle and process. So that's an important definition, right? Because it kind of takes the load off that heavy, heavy word, right? Because when you talk about trauma, if you're not met with, well, I don't have trauma, right? Because everyone's idea of trauma is if you were in war, or if you were sexually abused, or if you went through this ginormous event that was just catastrophic, right? You were a victim in 9/11. But really trauma, you know, and even, you know, people will differentiate it with capital T trauma and lowercase t trauma. The body doesn't know the difference, right? It is impactful, and it will know the difference when you've been through a bunch of complex traumas, for sure, right? And that's when it becomes profound and you see the suffering become greater on the nervous system and the body at whole. But really trauma is when it's not about the event. It's about the way the nervous system responds to the event. So if you experience something, say you were bullied at school for 3 weeks, and it really, really impacted you, and that energy is not processed and released through, you know, therapy, through somatic work, which we'll talk a little bit about, then that energy, trauma is just energy that gets stuck in our body. And when that energy gets stuck, and when it compounds with more stress and more trauma, it has nowhere to go if it's not worked out and worked out through the body. It will get stuck, and it will cause disease and illness and anxiety and depression and any other survival response pattern that works for that particular person. So if you take addiction, for example, addiction is simply a solution to a problem, right? Now, there's some genetic and epigenetic influences and inherited trauma and all that, but it's a solution to a problem, right? Because we're in pain, and we solve that pain with whatever, you know, the addictive substance of choice for that person is.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah. And I mean, and what happens is the trauma gets buried and buried and buried because for whatever reason, we're not seen, we're not heard, we're not able to share it. We don't know how to. Then you tie in shame with that, and shame and trauma are a little bit different than each other. But, you know, shame is I'll get the quote because I don't want to say it wrong because it's so good, but remind me to circle back around to Brene Brown's definition of shame. It's beautiful. And I will, maybe I can look it up while I'm talking here, but it's, you know, shame plays a big part in the trauma response as well.
Well, and, you know, and look at, I'm sorry, Heidi, and just look at the level of, you know, and we can see it within the media this past 18 months. I mean, they have been driving in the idea of shame. They've been almost promoting the shame.
Yes. And really, and I love that you're saying that, because with shame, it is not yours. Shame is something that is given to you through a caregiver, through a parent, through a teacher. It's not yours, but we perpetuate it with, you know, exactly and now you're seeing it through the media and through all of that, you know, that just, you know, like we're talking about masks, you know, and, oh, you're not a good person if you don't wear a mask, right? You are this, if you just do it, this is the best thing to do and the nice thing to do. And it's just, you know, we see shame as a big part of the story as well.
And now, you know, they shifted the shame to you're going to infect others if you don't get this. And now, you know, they shifted to that shame. And, you know, but really when you're stepping back, you're realizing all of these systems they've created, you know, government, schools, healthcare, you know, what have you, they're all been propped up as a parent. And what does parent do? They shame. they shame. If you don't listen to me, we're going to shame you. And
Right.
that's why I have to come.
And I found the definition. So this is Brene Brown's definition of shame, which I love. The intensely painful feeling or experience, so in the body, of believing in the brain that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And so what that shows to you, if it's both a body and brain thing, addressing that needs to be both a cognitive, which we call the top-down approach, right? Modern therapy, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, but also the somatic bottom-up approach, which is more body-based. Let's move these through the body, right? So for example, if I'm assuming you all have experienced anxiety at some point in your life, whether it's in the form of anxiety attacks or panic attacks or just general nervousness, you feel it, right? And, you know, this is an important thing, and I'm not going to get into, I'm going to try to drop in and out of the neuroscience and the, kind of neurobiology of trauma, but it's important to understand for people to get where it comes from is you can't, so if you experience anxiety and you feel it in your body, right? That is your nervous system state. Okay. And we'll segue and I'll share the chart to help people understand this. So you have a state. Okay. I'm nervous. My heart's racing. I'm sweating. Then follows the story. So state creates story. So say you have a panic attack when you go into a crowded space. Okay. And you get sweaty and you get clammy and your heart starts racing. That's the state. And then the story is going to be, I have to get out of here. This place isn't safe. I'm scared. Oh my God, I'm going to pass out. I'm going to faint in front of everybody and it's going to be embarrassing. We can't fix the state by changing the story, right? You can't cognitively walk out of a panic attack or an anxiety attack. We have to go back and address the nervous system, the state, and then the state will change the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So I'm going to share my screen here. I think this is a good time to bring it up. And we'll go over a little bit of the polyvagal theory. I'll try to make it really quick so we can do like kind of a quick background of trauma, and then we can understand why this is affecting the parents so much with the mask and why it's affecting kids so much and how that works, if that's okay.
Yeah. And then I definitely, I definitely want to give all of our viewers the tools to help them to get out, to get out of those physical effects that they're having.
Yes. And I'm going to, so how I typically work with a client is, and Abby, you've worked with me, so you know this, but I will, first thing, whenever you deal with working with trauma and emotional wounds, is creating an environment of safety. If someone doesn't feel safe, no healing can occur. So that's just the bare minimum. But then there's an education component to it, right? What is your nervous system? What's happening to me when I get anxiety? What's happening to me when I'm in fight or flight? What's happening to me when I'm in a freeze state, right? Because that's what we're seeing happen right now in society, right? It's just a collective view of the dysregulated nervous system. Mm-hmm. Okay, so can you all see the chart?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we're looking for ideal nervous system function, we are looking for flexibility. We are looking for a nervous system that can flow in and out of states with ease and without getting stuck in one of them. Okay. So if we look at the bottom of the chart, you see the social engagement, the green. And this chart, this is the one I use with all my clients. It does a really good example of showing you when you're in social engagement, or you can see underneath it says the ventral vagal. That's the part of the vagus nerve. You see that you're connected, you're calm, you're settled, you're grounded. You all can read the words there, right? It's a very you feel that balanced state, right? Now, it doesn't exist in and of itself. A lot of these states are mixed, right? So typically, if you were looking at like an ideal state would be a little bit of ventral and a little bit of activation, right? So you can get up and go, right? Pure ventral would be I'm laying in a meadow watching, the sun and the wildflowers, which is great, but that's not how everyday life is going to be lived at all times. So you can see, if we're going to follow the curve up, that when we get triggered, right? Everyone, that's a big word these days. I'm triggered, right? Which is really just my nervous system's getting activated, right? And we start moving into that yellow. That's fight or flight, okay? So real important, everything from the diaphragm up is innervated by the ventral vagal nerve, okay? So diaphragm up is ventral vagal, okay? So when we talk about that, we look at, people's facial expressions, their intonation, what their eyes look like. It's the human connection of the face and the ears and the voice. Now, as we go into fight or flight, people experience it differently. Some might be anxiety, some might be anger, but our nervous system is getting activated, right? And this is necessary, right? If you're, getting chased by a bear, you don't want to be hanging out in ventral vagal because you're not going to move. You need to move, right? So, you're triggered or you're activated, and it can be, shown as any of those different things. And then when it becomes too much for the body to handle that, it will go into a freeze state. Okay. So a great example is of it. If you take like a cat and a mouse, okay, and a cat is chasing a mouse, the mouse is going to be in fight or flight. Like, I've got to get out of here or I'm going to get killed. When the mouse senses that danger or death is imminent, it will freeze. It'll play dead, right? And two things are going to happen. Either the mouse is going to play dead and the cat thinks, okay, well, this is no longer exciting, and walks away, or it's going to die and it's going to prepare its body to disassociate from the pain and, impending death that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So none of these states in and of themselves are good or bad. It's when we get stuck in them that creates the nervous system dysregulation. Okay. So somebody who's always anxiety ridden, always in fear, right? Which is what we're seeing now. So we're seeing a lot of people in fight or flight, but we're also seeing a lot of people in freeze, right? And the thing that's just tricky about freeze is if trauma is energy, the energy of being frozen or immobilized is very, very highly charged, right? Because it's the same energy that's just gotten trapped from the previous state, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what we have is we have a lot of people walking around in the state that we call functional freeze, right? This would be the perfectionists, the I can't stop working. My day is so busy. Look at me. All I do is work, right? Where from a biochemical standpoint, the body's kind of immobilized, but they're kind of running the rat race of that energy that's trapped in there. Okay.
I kind of feel is this Jenni, like, a lot of people are saying, when you're looking at these, covered faces, that I believe like the disassociation is seeing. It's like, people are saying their eyes are just empty.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're seeing a lot of, and we'll get into that, but really just hold off for 1 second, because with this, as we see that kind of curve, right, the goal would be, oh my gosh, I'm triggered. Let me go through that pathway and come back down to the ventral vagal or the social engagement system, right? If you look at the little sentence at the very bottom of the green block, it says the VVC is the beginning and end of the stress response. Yep. Do you see that in the bottom of the green block? Mm-hmm. Okay. When the ventral vagal is dominant, the other ones are just blends where you kind of go through them. Mm-hmm. I see. So what's happening is we're seeing right now collectively people stuck. Can you see my little cursor doing this?
Yep.
Okay. We're stuck here. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is, when you're asking, well, what can people do about it, is if you're in fight or flight, we want to work on bringing down the arousal cycle, right? We want to deactivate that energy. But if we're in freeze, we want to gently move back through it. Okay. So if, say you're stuck in freeze, say you're in complete shutdown, you're living in your house, you're terrified of everything, you are masked inside, you've been jabbed a bunch of times, the world's coming to an end. In order for you to slowly move towards the social engagement system, the ventral vagal, that like calm, grounded, in the moment exists, you have to go back through that activation part of it. Right? You can see that you come down through the yellow. So you do that very gently. So the tools that we implement are dependent on what state the person is currently in, if that makes sense, right? And sometimes tools can be used in both fight or flight or freeze. And sometimes there's one that's better for freeze and one that's better for fight or flight because the energy output is different. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of I'll jump in and do my first little hack for people is triggers only happen in the yellow and the red. That's where triggers occur.
Yeah.
Okay. And triggers happen like that. Okay. I call them the rat traps. And when people have highly hypervigilant nervous systems that have been stuck in fight and flight for years, those rat traps are going to go off if they hear a lawnmower outside, right? It's too quick. So it's not about getting rid of the trigger per se, because sometimes you can't. The body, the nervous system the state is going to happen. But if we can get a tool in between the state and the story, that's where we can do the work.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Okay. So if triggers only happen in fight or flight or freeze, what we have in the social engagement or the ventral vagal, we use those synonymously, is we can offer glimmers. So glimmers are small micro moments of ventral vagal stimulation where we pause and we notice something that brings that happiness and groundedness and calmness to our nervous system. So I'll start people, this is usually one of the first, exercises that I give them is, I want you to go and make a glimmer journal and write down 1 or 2 glimmers that happen. And it could be, I saw a flower today. God, it was so nice to go and look at the stars last night. And when they can focus on that glimmer, it brings the nervous system back into that ventral vagal state, at least for a little bit. And so what we're doing is we're retraining, rewiring, this is what neuroplasticity is, the nervous system to be able to go back into that state. Because here's the deal, right? And this is why what we're doing to our children right now is so scary, is when we're perpetually in fight or flight or freeze, then there's so much work that needs to be done to pull them back out of it, right? We're wiring their nervous system to be dysregulated. That's what the problem is. And that's why, if you all follow me, I'm so adamant about the kids. I'm so adamant about, stop doing this, because from a neurobiology standpoint, it's not good, right? It's not just like, they want to be with their friends, at school, so let's put them in masks. There's so much more going on here from, a physiological standpoint.
Yeah.
So I know that I'm like going through that really quickly, but it's necessary in order to you can't master your nervous system if you don't understand your nervous system, right? And so when you're aware of, wow, right now I'm in fight or flight, I feel those sensations, let me be with them and let me implement a tool to help me walk through that. Now, it's a much more detailed process than this, right? When you're healing and unpacking trauma, but just for your listeners and your viewers to kind of get started, this is where we would start.
Well, and Jenni, this makes me think of with the kids going into these school settings, these social settings where they are seeing their peers being their face covering, it almost puts them into freeze, because so much of our nonverbal, natural, innate communication systems is through facial expression.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so
the social engagement system, yeah.
Yes. So therefore, we're removing that completely from these children to rely on that. So if a child is not naturally intuitive in regards to reading people's energy just through the eyes alone, which I'm sorry, for 18 months, that is all that they are giving us as a global society. I mean, this is where being intuitive has really helped the people, people who are intuitive. We've been able to kind of breeze through this because we can read energy just through the eyes.
Yeah.
Children, if they are not completely open in how to read just the eyes, they are going into these freeze states because they don't know what the person they're engaging with, what they're feeling. And on a nervous system, they don't know how to react because they can't read the nonverbal social cues.
Right. And so this is the important thing. The nervous system's main job, its only job is to keep you alive. Right. And what it reads is it reads cues of safety and it reads cues for dangers. If we're just going to break it down to like the bare, Reader's Digest version of it. Right. Yeah. So if we take the social engagement system, right, this is the system that contributes to our sense of safety. Right. It's in the presence of other people that this sense of safety is cultivated with people. Right. It's called co-regulation. Right. Healing trauma is done through relationships. It's done through co-regulating with safe people, right? So we look for other people for cues of safety in their face and their tone of voice, right? And that's how we assess whether they're safe to approach or not, right? Non-verbal cues, which you just talked about, eye contact, facial expression, tone of voice, right? And so take somebody that's in that freeze response. I'm just going to keep that chart up there. So if that's okay, or I can take it down, whatever you want to do. Okay. If someone's in the immobilization response, right, they're not in social engagement. You can't be in both because there's different brain where these states occur in different places in the brain. Okay. When you are in fight or flight, that's, and freeze, they're in the lower parts of your brain, the more primitive parts of your brain. When those are activated, we call it like the lid flipping off, right? When your lid's off, and you are triggered and you're in one of those dysregulated states, your prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, the executive functioning part of your brain, the rational part is offline. So you are unable to think rationally. Think about somebody, like say you walked up to a friend that was just in a car accident and you asked them how their workday was. They're not going to be able to answer you or have a conversation with you because they are in an active state of probably freeze at that point, right? So the goal is to get the lid back on. So then we can start implementing these, you can implement the tools so you can stop the story and the perpetuation of the fear. And so what these kids are seeing are these, kind of lifeless eyes, lack of facial expression. They can't hear through the mask. So it's a lot of what are you saying? I can't hear you. And so intonation, think about it from a standpoint of a baby. Okay. That's your tone with a baby is like everything. That's why everyone speaks in those real cute, cooey, cooing voice. And, a little fun fact, we're not born with a developed ventral vagus, like the vagus nerve. We borrow it from our caregiver for the first year of life. That's how we assess safety and danger. So that's why childhood trauma is such an impactful thing from early, right? And an early age. So, back to the mask thing is we're built for connection. We're hardwired for that. And so we are shutting that primal wiring down or off, right? Because you can't interpret the safety with somebody else that way. Yeah. And I would go as far as saying that I believe collectively across the planet, our social engagement system is being eroded bit by bit. And I believe that's what's leading to the spike in stress, the spike in fears, the spike in freeze response that just, when you can't even have a conversation with somebody with a different opinion because it's like, the person goes nuclear, whether they're pro-vax, not vax, pro-mask, not vax. And that's because we are eroding that part of our nervous system away. And so it's almost like we're just living in the yellow and the red.
Yeah.
Do you find there's a connection of ego to trauma? Because I notice when people have their trauma come up and they're healing, there's a lot of destruction of ego, taking down.
Yeah, so the egos, I do a lot of ego work with people because you're seeing everyone's ego come up. And remember, the ego, which is basically cultivated from birth to age 7, right, is kind of that sense of identity that we build. I'm just going to, for people who don't really know what the ego is that sense of self that we develop from up to age 7 that really is based on others' opinions of us, the world around us, what people are saying to us. And the ego's main job, again, is to keep you alive, right? It is survival at all costs, and it's to protect your inner child. Right. And I'm not going to go on a dark hole with the inner child stuff, but just know the ego protects that. Mm-hmm. And ideally, what we're working through as we start unpacking trauma as adults, those willing to do the work, is can we bring our ego along for the ride, but not steering the boat? So this is a really silly analogy about the ego that I give everybody. And I don't know why it came to me. It's the weird intuitive part of me, but I'm like, when you watch those like old movies, like in France, and there's like someone driving like a motorcycle and there's a sidecar and like they both have scarves on and they're like enjoying the breeze driving through the countryside. Like that would be the ideal picture of like you and your ego, mm-hmm. right? Ego's there. It's going to speak out. It's going to say its thing. It's going to, be defensive and projecting, but you can keep it in check. And what I joke with most people's ego is either that's flip-flopped and they're in the sidecar and the ego is driving the bike, or the ego is behind them kind of like holding their neck on for dear life. So yes, the ego is a huge part of this, and it's not to be blamed. It's neither bad nor good, right? And Nicole LaPera, the holistic psychologist, goes into this a lot. She does beautiful writing and work with the ego, but it really is a old, outdated software system that we're still letting run the show now. And so the goal is to not say, oh, I want to get rid of you entirely, but really to say, thank you, I appreciate you being there for me, right? But now I have new learning and new objectives and new understandings that I've got to implement in real time. I don't need you, because it's really like a false sense of self, right? It's not based in current reality. So yes, you are seeing the ego. I believe that one of the gifts of this whole pandemic is two gifts. One, it's brought everyone's trauma to the surface and an invitation to work through it if they want to. The second thing is the filtering process, where it allows all of us who are willing to do the work to filter out what works for us in our life and what doesn't, right? Because as you all know, being, energy people, we really get the invitation for who we want to surround ourselves with and what we want to do with this current situation, right? Yeah. You get to decide, am I going to send my kids to school in a mask? Am I going to get the vaccine? And sure, there are arguments on both sides, but I would say, when you look at the data, when you look at not only the science, but you look at the social, the physiological, the emotional, the energetic impact that masks that have zero scientific basis. And I'm not going to go there. Like I have plenty of research, right? But it's just, there's no science behind it. There is no science behind masks whatsoever.
It's like a lot of peer pressure.
Right. But the thing is, facts don't matter, right? I mean, if you go to the CDC, children under the age of 18 have a survival rate of 998% survival rate with no treatment.
Right.
So just being here, right? And so, basically they have a 0% chance of dying from this, but yet they're the ones that are being subjective to this horrendous public policy, right? You can go to a Tennessee, Alabama game and sit shoulder to shoulder with people cheering on your football team, but your kid can't go touch their friend and hold their hand at recess. Yeah. It's like absurd.
Yeah. Whole nother level of trauma there.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, we're watching active trauma play out. And the thing that I think that Abby and I spoke about, or she's seen at least me write about, is, it's done at the expense of the children of these parents. I'm going to say it, kind of gaslighting, kind of, you know, making themselves feel better. And I said to y'all earlier, it's like this false reassurance from fearful and neurotic parents, right?
Yeah.
Because either they don't want to step up, or they don't want to take the blame, or they don't want to be the only mom sending their kid to school in a mask. Like, what are we teaching our children to just be compliant against everything they stand for, right? And that's the kids see that, right? The kids see it.
See everything and feel everything.
Right. And they see what they see what you do, you know, like for me, for example, we don't wear masks anywhere. I told my daughter, you have to wear a mask on an airplane and if you go into a hospital, because, you know, but other than that, no.
Yeah. That's the same exact thing in our house as well. But, you know, Jenni, so what are some tools that parents can have? And also just for the parents, what are some physical cues that they can look for in their child to let them know that their child might be stuck in freeze? You know, what are some
I love
things that you're looking for?
Right. And, you know, I hope, and I don't know how to do this, but if someone reaches out to you and wants any of this material, I'm happy to send that to them, these charts and this thing, because you can use some of these, some of the words that are listed on this form, right? So, you know, fight or flight would look like irritated, angry, disruptive behavior, not listening to the point of, you know, next level, not listening. All kids don't listen. Being nervous, you know, kind of an onset of shyness that they didn't have before, you know, reluctance to go into public places or, you know, school. Okay. So fight or flight's easier to assess because it's more of that like outwardly displayed energy. Freeze is going to look a little bit more probably like I said, like the shyness or like the a lot of crying, but crying where it's like they're going off and being alone, right? Kind of separating, not wanting to go do activities, being depressed, you know, clinginess to their parents. You see that a lot, right? Like if you're at a kid's activity and the kid's like holding on for dear life to their parent. I mean, I'm going to say this and, you know, your viewers might not like it or might like it. I've never seen a kid walk up in a mask that has a regulated look on their face. Now I can read eyes. So, but you just don't see it, right? They're nervous and they're shy and they don't know what to do. And then there's this conversation about, do you want to wear your mask? Do you not want to, like even the parents out of sorts. So I'd also say, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Okay. So if you have a parent that's very fearful and in a specific state, you're often going to see that mimicked by a child for sure. Now they go in different stages. And remember, it's a flow. Okay. Sometimes they can be stuck in freeze and sometimes they can dabble in and out, right? They can be in freeze and come back out. And, you know, if you can see my little arrow where I'm circling on the chart right here, this is where a lot of panic attacks happen, right? Is when someone's been in freeze and they come back out and the activation's too much and boom, right? They also can happen obviously up in here as well. So, yeah. So, you know, I would say parents, loved ones, teachers can identify and look by just like observing the child, right? It looks like you're feeling overwhelmed. It looks like, you know, that you're really upset. Right here, one of the things I love on this chart, if you can see it, is when you're in fight or flight, it's a very mobilizing, kind of active state. Freeze is the I can't, right? The overwhelm, the stuck, the resistant, the shameless.
We're seeing the I can and the I can't. We were talking about this right before we started the show. Right now, you know, at the beginning of this school year, when everything for us locally here in Charleston, but they started bringing back all the mandates. All, you know, these parents went in full fight or flight, and we had the really, really strong, you know, I can, like, we're going to mobilize and we can stop this.
Push, yeah.
We're going to do this, like the big push going in, and the fight is still continuing. You know, we had some wins, but the school boards, they're continuing on to for this. And now the parents are moving into the I can't. They're moving into
Right.
the freeze.
Right. And I will offer this, that when this pandemic-y thing started happening, I said this to everybody, and I said, the masks were already there, right? The person was already wearing a mask, right? So you're not going to find, this is a bold statement, but just go with it because I like to make bold statements, but you're not going to find somebody that's terrified, that's masking everywhere, masking this, that wasn't already fearful and had that type of nervous system dysregulation already, right? There was already underlying, you're just not going to see that, right? You're going to see kind of, the trauma that was already there is really just being kind of exposed, meaning it just had to bubble out, right? It's too much, right? That's what an anxiety attack is. An anxiety attack or an anxiety feeling is just the energy saying, I got to get out of here. I got to move, got to get released. So that leads me into, what can we do? Yep. Right? What can we do? How can we help these kids once we identify that, they're in a state? So when we stop to notice, where these kids are, we can help them kind of name it. What are you feeling right now? How does your body feel? And remember, I talked to you about state creates story. So we want to go after the state, right? We want to go after where we feel it in the body. So how do you feel's great, because they might say, I feel sad. Okay, well, where do you feel that sadness? It feels heavy right here. Okay, right? Then we can start going and applying some body-based somatic stuff to address that, right? And so, sorry, my dog's making some noise. So for example, let's talk about if a kid is in anxious, okay? They're in more of the yellow part of the dysregulated nervous system state. And when I say dysregulated, I mean when it's not serving the current environment, okay? You hear regulation a lot and dysregulation a lot. Well, fight or flight is good if you're getting chased by someone who's trying to steal your purse. You're going to want fight or flight. So when I talk about dysregulation, when the nervous system response is not congruent to the environment that is happening at that time. Does that make sense? Okay. So one of the things I do, now do you want tools for like everybody or specifically kids?
I would love tools for kids, but obviously, it starts with the parents as well. So
yeah. So yeah. And really when we look at unpacking trauma and we talk about healing comes through the parents, right? If you are setting an example for your children, and I don't mean what you're saying, I mean what you're doing. That's where it starts, right? I can't remember who gave me this analogy, but I loved it. It's like, if you're on an airplane and there's a lot of turbulence, you're going to look to the flight attendant. Everybody does, right? What's he or she doing? If they look calm and comfortable, that is going to be regulating to you. Okay. It's the same things with our kids, right? So, Heidi, I'm assuming you're probably like Abby, but Abby and I are very staunch. Like our kids aren't wearing masks. So we go around. We don't wear masks in stores. We never did, even when it was mandated here in Charleston. And it was just what we did. And so our kids that was what we did. Right.
Or I told them we're just not going to patronize this place because they're
right. And so it's just is what you do. And they look at you like that flight attendant, like they got it. I'm good. I'm taken care of. I'm safe. Perfect. Our nervous systems are co-regulating with one another. We're safe. Right. And so that's where it's the parents' job, right? It's the parents' job to get in, start unpacking this trauma, working on healing if they feel invited to, right? I don't ever force anyone into the healing journey. As you all know, it's a roller coaster for sure. It's always an invitation if you want to do it. But I think now it's almost to the point where I'm like, and I don't use these words. I don't use need and should and have to. But I'm almost at that point where I'm like, we're getting to that, where like, I think the parents are being called at a level that's never been seen before to to get themselves healed and start working through some of this stuff for the sake of their children.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So, okay. So some of the activities, I love shaking off. So like if you have anxiety, just doing like a shake off, even like dancing to music.
Hey, Jenni,
so
can
with kids,
we go back to the different screens so they can see you more, your physical movements?
Yes, sorry. Let me close this out. Stop sharing. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the exercises that I do is called snow globe. And so, and that is where you'll go and shake your body. You can do your legs, your arms, anything, kind of just wiggle for 30 seconds and then pause and just be still for 30 seconds. So if you think of a snow globe, like shaking it up and then coming back to calm. So remember, in fight or flight, that is a very, very activated energy that's asking to be released. You know, and I know for me, when I was like working through my anxiety, when I heard that anxiety is just energy that wants to get out, it made my moments when it would come on strong, I could deal with it better. Cause I'm like, oh, that's all it is. Right. Because we get like, but think about it. If you have anxiety and it's in the form of chest pressure, that state goes automatically to what? I'm having a heart attack, right? So you can see how the state creates the story. So it's not really the state that's scary. It's the story that then perpetuates the state, right? And one thing I remind people as I'm going to, you know, just throw this in between the tools you can use is when you're triggered, adrenaline and cortisol are released, right? Just that's what happens from a physiological standpoint. It takes about 90 seconds for those hormones to kind of work their way through the body and dissipate, if not reactivated, which usually isn't the case. But if you can just like go for 90 seconds and really try to implement a tool, the likelihood of being able to like bring that activation down is higher. But what happens is when the story comes in, it's just, then you're just releasing more and more and more. So 90 seconds to kind of process from like a chemical level, those things. So shaking, the snow globe exercise is a good one. Jumping on a trampoline, great one. Right? You know, I have a lot of my clients get those little mini rebounders, right? That you can bring in your house. It's great for your lymphatic system too. I mean, there's a lot of health benefits, but that's a good one. Getting like a little yoga tune-up ball or a lacrosse ball and rolling it underneath your feet. Your feet have a lot of fascial points in it. And I like lacrosse balls because they're more dense. And just kind of rolling your feet, that's a really good one for anxiety. And kids like it, right? You get to go on Amazon, you pick out your lacrosse ball, it's your ball, go get your ball. You can, you know, use it when you need it. So these are easy. And these are, I use these for kids and adults. These aren't like in, you know, one or the other. Also, I don't like doing this with lacrosse ball. I have a thing called a yoga tune-up ball, and I'll have links for all this stuff if people want it to Amazon, if they want to get these, is having a kid, lay down and roll the ball on their chest, right? So here is where the fight or flight lives, kind of in the upper chest and upper back area. And so rolling on the upper chest area or having them lay face down and rolling up and down their back can be really helpful. It kind of covers two things, right? You're kind of releasing some of that energy with the ball, but you're also connecting with the parent to the kid. So there's an extra sense of safety there, right? Where there's just not them doing the exercise. Stomping out, right? We don't let our kids get angry, right? Let your kid be mad. It's okay. Peter Levine does a really beautiful exercise. He's the guy who created the Somatic Experiencing Institute, and he does a thing called VU breathing. I don't know if I did this with you. Did I do VU with you?
I was wondering if we can get to some of the vocal stuff.
So VU is just, and you know, I will say that I don't do a ton of focusing on breathing with people who are in fight or flight at the beginning, because focusing on breathing for somebody in an active anxiety attack can be very extra triggering, right? Because it's too much focus on that area. So it's not that breathing isn't profoundly effective. It is. It's just, I think sometimes it's tough for people to get there. I think some of these other tools to kind of bring the trigger down a little bit and then bring breathing on. But VU's great because you don't really have to think about it. You just you inhale. And the goal of that is to get the vibration in kind of the palate of your mouth and eventually into your gut. So when you VU with the V and you blow out, that reverberation hopefully goes through your palate and your gut. And what that does is it stimulates your vagus nerve. Because with trauma, the vagus nerve is undertoned. Okay. And so what we're doing is we're trying to build up the toning of the vagus nerve so it can do its job better. Right. The vagus nerve basically innervates everything from your brain stem all the way down to your gut. So it's a huge impact. And, you know, the vagus nerve is a whole nother podcast, but just so we know, like getting that toned through VU breathing, through singing really loud, through gargling, even making yourself gag a little bit. If you've been when you're brushing your teeth is another way to, assess that. So just a nice little, tip here is if you go to try to make yourself to test your gag reflex and you can't gag, your vagus nerve is not working. So like, some people, can you? Yeah. Some people, I'll have clients always test that. They'll literally have their fingers halfway down their throat and nothing. Because it's a quick little tip to kind of assess where the vagus nerve is in its current state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Remember Jenni, so in my session with Jenni, my vagus nerve is completely shut down. Like it increased from years and years and years of suppressing the intuitive side of myself, of, that being my secret life and not expressing that and using my throat chakra properly. I was always shutting that down.
Right.
So yeah, and that's another form of, trauma. I wanted to bring up the vocal because in some of my readings, it will come through that some people, they need to just literally like get down on the ground, like get down on kneel down, squat down and just like, just kind of like yell almost. And that's coming from even past lives needing to come out. In one session, their higher self was saying, if they continue to do this, they're going to start speaking a different language because it is from that lifetime. And it's, because we don't know the layers of suppressing our thoughts, our voices, our chakras, and so even though we've been in this very polarizing blip, it goes back layers.
It goes back layers. And what's funny is you'll find people that have been stuck in freeze. And let's be honest, probably 90% of the population is there. They dabble in and out of the fight flight, but most people that have had years of trauma, especially with complex PTSD, tend to be stuck within the freeze state, but will come in and out, right? Because there's a point to where your body can't live in fight or flight anymore. And it has to just go up to that. And it just kind of innately has to go into that more biochemical immobilization to survive and to live. But what's cool from a spiritual level is for those in freeze that have gifts, once we mobilize some of that energy, right? Because even though you're in freeze, that energy still trapped is very highly activated. Once we can start moving them down that and through the activation, their gifts will just go, because it blocks intuition, right? When you're in freeze, think about the area where freeze is, it's diaphragm down, right? It's almost like it's suppressing exactly what you said, right? Not just like the vagal activity down there, but also all of the intuition and gut instinct, if you will. So I love that. That's very true.
Yep.
So another thing that you can do when it's more fight or flight is you kind of notice something. So have, because you can see on my screen, I have a plant behind there. So you could have, you or the kid could say, okay, talk to me about that plant. What color is it? What color green? Describe to me its shape. Is it spiky? And just being able to kind of bring that back online where they're focusing on that, that object, right? And really kind of over describing it. Because let's be honest, you know, I get a lot of people where it's like, well, I can't use that tool. It's not like I'm going to carry a ball around school when I'm having an anxiety attack. Fair enough, right? But you can say, excuse me, I need to go to the restroom, and do a little shake in the restroom, you know. And so it's really about just giving them enough tools in their toolbox. You know, I always tell people, when you're healing trauma, you're building a house, right? And we have, you know, you've got to lay the foundation, which is what we're doing here. And a lot of people have scaffolding on that old house. We say we're renovating a house, and some of that scaffolding may be old coping mechanisms. It might be medication they want to get off of. It might be this, that, or the other. Well, you don't just take the scaffolding down, right? You build the house up, and then you can start taking down kind of that part for the people. So giving them all the tools, right? You may have a tool belt full of tools, and you really love your hammer and your screwdriver and your drill, and you may have a file in there that you never need, but maybe you do every once in a while. So if you give somebody a ton of tools, then they're able to select from that whenever it's appropriate. Because everybody ends up having their own favorite tools, right? Like mine, I love the shaking. I love the ball underneath the feet. For some people, that doesn't resonate. Some people love, you know, the 20 other thousand tools so it just depends, right? And what that does is it allows people to pick their own thing, right? This isn't like, here's my formula, follow it. You know, you get to do you.
Yeah.
So tools for if you're stuck in freeze or that immobilization state. Now, remember, in order to come out of that state and get back to the social engagement system, you've got to go through activation. But we don't want to activate too much, because it'll be too much for the nervous system. It'll sense danger, and it's either going to have a panic attack and go back up there, or just go right back up there. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I like doing really light things like body hugs, right? So I have people put their right hand underneath their armpit over their heart, and then their right hand under their armpit, left hand on your right arm, and just kind of holding yourself. And funny enough, this is really uncomfortable for a lot of people. They don't like it. So you watch for these tools. Like if you give your kid this tool and they're super uncomfortable with it, then that's not the right thing. Maybe you start with just putting your arm under your armpit and hang out there. Maybe you can bring this arm up. You know, can you ask them to rub their arm? People don't like this either, right? Especially if they don't have a good connection with their body. So watching in the terms of a child, watching where their nervous system goes with that, right? You don't want to do too much where then it scares them into, that doesn't feel safe. Because remember, the main goal of when we're healing or working with trauma or working with this is creating safety, especially for kids, right? I love this one too. It's the butterfly tapping. So if you like cross your fingers here, and you can change the speed. You know, some kids, you know, if they're a little bit more activated, might like that. Some might just be like, okay. Always an invitation to close eyes. That for a lot of people will not feel safe. So you invite, if you feel safe, you know, then close your eyes. If not, keep them open, and you can keep looking at mommy. Essential oils under the nose. Anything that brings the senses back, right? Having lavender, any of the calming ones, bergamot, you know, whatever, having them on hand. Rubbing the arm.
Have my little lavender with me always.
I love it, right? You know, I always have crystals with me, because holding the crystal, I mean, I do it from an energy point too, but just having that tactile feeling on the hands, right? You can do that with those stress balls or whatever. Chewing on crunchy food, you know, sipping through a straw, walking, doing a slow walk. You know, nature's a big grounding thing for me, like kind of the obvious ones. Rocking in a chair, sitting on a stability ball, doing slow, everything's gentle, right? Gentle music, right? If I saw a kid that was curled up in the corner, really like in freeze, I'm not going to tell them to stand up and start shaking off, right? That would be too much activation. I would walk them into something slower and calmer. Kids are one of those, like, I mean, kids are interesting clients because I'll come in, you know, with like, okay, we're going to work on this today. And then they won't want to do something, right? So then you're like, okay, well, will you do it? You know, I was going to teach a kid how to do the shake, and they didn't want to do that. And he had brought a stuffed animal. And I said, well, will you sit on the ground and tap the stuffed animal on your knee like this? And that worked great. And you can see the nervous system shift, right? Especially like, you know, I'm trained to do it, but just from an intuitive standpoint, you can see where somebody is in their nervous system state. And I will tell you, this is important because I get this a lot with people. It's not about always being in the green. It's not about living in ventral vagal and la la land, right? It's about being able to go through the flow. I didn't send you this diagram, but when we talk about the polyvagal ladder, it's the same thing, except the green is at top, fight or flight is in the middle, and freeze is below. So it's same thing. It's just set up different. But someone said, I'm working on being at the top of the ladder. And I said, that's great, but that's not the goal. The goal is to live up there more, but to be able to go up and down the ladder more, you know, in flow or effortlessly.
So it's to come like in and out of them.
Yeah, because there's mixed stages, right? I mean, and this is, I meant to mention this earlier. When you go play sports, or your kid goes and plays sports, they're in a mixture of fight or flight, or we'll call it sympathetic, right? It's a sympathetic nervous system and ventral. Okay. When you're doing yoga, you're in a mixture of dorsal, you know, that red area, and ventral, right? Same thing with sex. It's a mixture of the freeze and the ventral. Okay. So there's mixed states, right? Like, you know, play would be a mixture of sympathetic and so it's not that they just occur in and of themselves or they're good or bad. It's the stuckness in one, right? Or living your life in one where the nervous system dysregulation goes. And again, if that energy has nowhere to go, it will cause disease. End of story. Right? Because it attacks the nervous system. And then if you think about the nervous system and everywhere it innervates, right? It starts with like a lot of autonomic nervous system diseases, autoimmune diseases, right? Fibromyalgia, you know, going on and on. I mean, that's why you see thyroid just blowing up these days, like all of, right? It goes after the weakest link in the person's body.
You know, and that's why you can see from, you know, every level of how the government, have handled this blip is the exact opposite, you know, because like you said, when we're encountering something that can induce stress, it should be more movement. And even, you know, more movement brings in better for your immune system. But what do? They induce lockdowns, and they're quarantining these children and keeping them at home. So, you know, they're shutting down the movement. And, you know, and I do want to bring up for the parents as well is, you know, we're talking a lot about this past, you know, 18 months, but kids can be, you know, especially if you have an empathic child, if you have a very intuitive child, if you have a mediumistic child already, they might be having night terrors, and they might be experiencing and seeing things that they don't know how to understand. And this can be putting them into that fight or flight and or freeze. So, you know, this isn't just to cover what we've been going through. This for, you know, our Starseed kids, they are experiencing this for different reasons. You know, if you have a telepathic, empathic child that's going to school and, you know, they're suddenly hearing all the thoughts that their teachers are having. I personally have had experience that with my oldest daughter. That puts them into a freeze, because she would come home and she said, I don't want to hear what my teachers are thinking. And, you know, and so the subject that Jenni's talking about covers, you know, so many different things, aspects in our Starseed children's lives.
Yeah. I was listening to it intently. This is incredible timing too, because we were dealing with a lot of trauma with my kids with their birth stories, like you were saying, traumatic births, and then situations with abandonments of dad. And, you know, there's trauma that comes in so many forms. I think we navigated our blip pretty well, but it's just like all my stuff was surfacing, theirs was too. So there's been a lot of healing going on.
And I'll tell you,
my son, in the pockets.
Oh, I love that. And I will tell you this, because I think that this is really important, is how we experience trauma is different for everybody. Okay. So how resilient a person is before and how well supported they are after makes all the difference in how that trauma is going to affect that person, right? If it's going to stay in there. So if you take, for example, two girls and they are both molested, right? Girl number one had a happy home life, parents very loving, supportive. She was able to share her feelings. That awful event happens. She tells them, they are supported. They go to the police, everything. That child, the likelihood of her being able to process and heal that trauma is much higher than somebody who came from a home that, say both parents, she's a latchkey kid, they're alcoholics. She tells them the event happens, no one believes her. It's going to be a totally different experience for her. So, if we think about, are we building, that's again, the resiliency, right? Are we creating a beautiful home, a supportive home, a resilient home for when trauma happens to our kids? Because guess what? It's going to, based on my definition, anything that happens too fast, too soon, or too much for the nervous system to handle and process. And are we there for them after it happens, right? We're not raising kids in a bubble where nothing's going to hurt or be painful or not, that, that's not their goal. Their goal is to walk through it, right? But are we creating that preliminary, nurturing environment? And are we creating the post-nurturing environment that allows that trauma to be processed and moved through? Because if we're not, this is where it's going to get stuck, right? And if we have two parents that are living in fear, masking up, scared to walk outside, teaching them that their friends are scary and fresh air is, not good.
Sorry, we lost Jenni there for a minute. But Jenni, go ahead and continue your thoughts with in the home.
So yeah, it's the most important. What are we modeling in the home, right? That's where we have the most power, right, to influence our children. And piggybacking on your first, broadcast or podcast, I should say, of getting your kid out of the public system, because that's the next most impactful environment where they spend most of their time, is what are we modeling for them? If we have two parents that are fearful, masking, don't go outside, you can't have a play date with this person because of this reason, then we're not setting them up to be resilient. We're setting them up to be scared. And then we're setting them up to what? If then they go play with that friend that wasn't wearing the mask, then they're going to get in trouble. And so it lands in that avenue of like, what kind of future are we creating for our kids to be able to get through these times, right? We all know as Starseeds, this totally happened for a reason. It was coming for years. It's meant to be the great, I don't like saying the great reset, but the great awakening, the great, unpacking of things. We get a choice of what we do with it. And I think where we all are is like, let's make the choice to teach our kids to be stronger through it, right? To make the tough decisions, to, maybe be the one kid in class that doesn't have the mask on, or, hey, I'm sorry, you're not gonna be able to go to that gymnastics class because they're making everyone mask up and that doesn't align with us. I'm really sorry, let's find something else to do. Rather than being like, no, that's the only gymnastics class in the history of the world that they could go to, right? And that's the kind of excuses these parents are making, right? Well, then it's,
Starts with us. Starts with
us. And guess what? Life is hard.
Yeah.
Welcome. I mean, trust me, there are days where I wish that my daughter was growing up like I did, playing Frogger on Atari and playing kick the can in the neighborhood, and you didn't have to worry about child trafficking. But guess what? That's not where we are. So
yeah,
it's about dealing with what is, and then creating resources and like these tools to.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and keep talking here because I think Jenni will be back in a minute. But it's one of those situations where if we are not part of the problem, then we need to be part of the solution. So, it is, sorry, we lost there for a minute, Jenni. So I kind of started talking. But
yeah,
what I was just saying to Heidi was being part of the solution, like, okay, we can't go to this. So, all right, so what are we going to do? And that's, a lot of people okay, we're going to start our own business then. If we can't go to any of the restaurants in New York because they're all mandating something, okay, well, let's all join in together and we'll open something on our own where we're not going to mandate. So that's how we're part of the solution and creating something that we do want to exist in.
Yeah. Make better choices. I know I, for one, had the grandest, best holiday party last winter, and I had the most attendance I've ever had. We had an unmasked Santa for one, too. It's like we had to be our own solution.
Yeah.
And people come, you know, they're craving it. It takes a couple way showers and leaders, but
yeah,
in our children's eyes, we're the way shower and leader. So.
We are, and it's proactive instead of reactive, and that's what everyone's doing, right? It's like, oh, I can't believe this is happening to us, right? Oh my gosh, can you believe it? Well, yeah, it is. I mean, and we're kind of beyond the, oh my God, this is so sad, woe is me. Like, hold space for the grief and the trauma, because it's affecting all of us. I mean, I'm not trying. I mean, there have been days where it especially being an empath, this is not a fun time, but at the same time, I'm not going to teach my kid that we bow down to unnecessary things, you know, and I think we all collectively feel that way. And I hope every day that more people wake up. And if they don't, then there's always that opportunity for them. But us who are, get the opportunity, right, to find solutions and to carve new ways out for healing, right? Because this is all about healing. Yeah. At the end of the day, this is all about healing.
And we're finding each other. And so are those kids.
Yeah.
We're finding the other sovereign kids. So.
Yes, I love that. And that's the important part, right? So it's always been about the tribes. It's always been about survival of the fittest. And, you know, I always joke about with people, I'm like, this is Hunger Games, but man, I'm not lying. It is. And it's find your tribe, find the collective, and it's not about, you know, excluding people, right? It's about, hey, you're welcome, but what we're creating is X, Y, and Z, because that is the survival mentality. That is the healing mentality. It's why I changed my Instagram handle to collective. Like, I believe power in numbers, right? But, you know, you've got to, being in the tribe, you've got to carry your weight. You got to do the work. I mean, it's, you know, you can't just walk in and have someone heal for you.
Yeah. 100%. Yep. In all my healings, you know, all healing begins inside of you. No one can heal you but you. So yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jenni. I truly, you know, Haiyan, we appreciate your time. I think that you were able to give the parents some amazing tools to help them with their kids, help them along their own healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And any resources that anyone needs, just point them my way. I'm happy to, especially the things that I showed today. I'm happy to send copies. Yes.
And do you take clients long distance?
I do. I work with, I would say right now, 50% of my client business is remote. And yeah, so it's a little mix of both.
I'm putting you in my back pocket.
I love that.
Yeah. So Jenni, can you tell everyone how they can find you?
Yes, I have a website that is jennihouston.com. So JENNI, Houston like Texas.com. I'm pretty active on Instagram. My handle on Instagram is @thewellcollective. So THEWELLE collective. That's my, you know, radically honest, no holds barred thing. I'm not real active on Facebook. Facebook is, you know, I'm on there for the groups and the local groups, but those are the two places that you can reach out to me. And you can contact me through my website, anyone who wants any more information on healing trauma and anxiety. And
perfect. Thank you so much, Jenni. We will put a link to your website and your Instagram, and then we'll put, if we can, some of those graphs that you're going to share into the description bar for the video.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get to the window of tolerance, but you can send that along anyway, because it's pretty self-explanatory, but it'll make sense, I think, to people based on what we talked about.
Perfect. All right. I appreciate your time, Jenni. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so.
Bye-bye.